Well, headed off here, travels with the Stevensons. Headed down to, might shock a few folks, my old 1998 Dodge Grand Caravan, over 200,000 miles. With the Lord's help, we got a new radiator, new right front fender, and a new hood, new axle, a bunch of other things. I don't know what they are to hold the old Nelly together. But anyway, we're got some new electrical components to make the fans work. And so we're headed down to out here on the new highway 17, headed down to see and hear Bernie Sanders. Somebody say, well, why are you going to see Bernie? Well, I'll tell you what, I try to keep an open mind on people and on events and on history. And I think he's an honorable statesman in many ways. I might not agree with him on several issues, but some issues I might agree with him on. And one thing I do know about him, having met him and followed him back in the early 70s, I guess it went on 72 to 75, when he first ran for office, didn't win, in fact hardly got any votes at all, but he was a very active person in civil rights, and as I was back in the 70s, and with Dr. Martin Luther King and the ministers, in a really non-violent demonstrations that were held back in those days, and that brought about a lot of good changes and good things. You had your choices back in those days. You could either choose to sort of lend your support to Dr. Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, and I had no desire to be a part of Malcolm X's operations at all. And Dr. Martin Luther King, I felt like was on the right track, and to where Jesus would be. And I always ask the question, what would Jesus do? In fact, many of y'all know I taught the first Black History course in the state of Kentucky back in 1970 with Erlanger Lloyd High School, and on a unit on Black History, and I took the first 2 Black History courses at the University of Kentucky in 1968, 69, and taught by Dr. Stephen Channing. And of course I had the history teachers of Dr. Charles Talbert, well, first of all, Mrs. Hinsdale, Reuben Hinsdale's wife, one of the greatest history teachers at the high school level that there could ever have been. And of course Mr. Hinsdale, about as strict as you could be as a superintendent, and of course as principal for most of the school years. And then Mr. George Edmondson, who was just really a saint. Miss all those folks. They're wonderful educators. I wish we had thousands and thousands of more just like them. And then Dr. Charles Talbert at the community college, where I took 4 history courses from him, who to me was one of the best history teachers at the University of Kentucky. And of course Dr. Thomas Clark, who became my personal friend for years and came up for my Pioneer Days picnics, and the History Museum's named after him in Frankfort, the Dr. Thomas D. Clark History Museum. And he's on my history tapes when I filmed the history of all 120 counties in Kentucky. So I have a great appreciation for the life of Bernie Sanders, who fought for civil rights. And by the way, his parents immigrated from Poland, and quite a story in itself about his raising, similar to my own in many ways, in that we grew up in pretty much an impoverished condition and situation. And back in those days, when my dad worked on the railroad, you had to be careful for asking for benefits, because if you was to happen to go out on a picket line, you might have people shoot at you and to try to break the strikes up. And it was never easy. I remember the days in the in the 1960s, early 1960s, when I worked as secretary of the Brotherhood of Railroad Trainmen, when I worked on the railroad after starting in the UK my first couple years, actually just the first year, then come home and got a job on the railroad and worked down there where my grandfather was crushed between two cars when my dad was only 5 years old. Dad grew up without his father, which I'm sure was a tough life. In fact, I know it was a tough life. Down in Flat Creek and Owen County and Gallatin County, Grant County, times were tough. And a lot of stories involved around that. A lot of poetry written by my mother called Give a Lift to Your Fellow Man. And that's what I like about Bernie Sanders. He believes in giving a lift to your fellow man. We might disagree on the methods of doing that, probably do, but I certainly share his sentiment on that. And so I'm making the little trek down here. I don't know if my health will hold up or not, but try to use my walker or whatever's the best way to get into this place to see him give his speech and just pay a little tribute to Bernie Sanders, Senator. I remember the first few races he ran, he hardly got enough votes to even be counted. And he ran, I think, for senator twice before being elected senator, and was congressman, I think. Well, he was mayor of the city, I think, of, what the heck was the name of that city? He was a mayor of a city there for, I think, several terms. And that was interesting how he got elected to all of that. But once he gathered himself to the people of Vermont, they fell in love with him, and they voted for him unanimously. I mean, just unbelievable margins ever since. And because he's an honest man. You know, you can differ in beliefs, but you like to deal with honest people. People that you know they're coming from their hearts. And that's the way Bernie Sanders has been, coming from his heart. So we'll head on down to the convention center here in Covington, Northern Kentucky. Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition to godly principles. Traveled with the Stevensons. You can reach us at 750-0000. God bless you and have a great day. We'll see you in a few minutes.